Seth Robinson, and welcome to another edition of TrendWatch. Today, we're going to be talking about the third trend out of our Outlook report, which is businesses will double down on data practices in the service of meeting some strategic objectives. So this is the third trend in our Outlook study, but it really probably could have been the first trend because in a lot of ways, data is a prerequisite to a lot of other things that businesses want to do. And that's why we highlighted the strategic objectives that they want to pursue. We've seen this for several years as businesses have wanted to do more advanced analytics with the data they already have. Now we're seeing with AI, they want to train AI systems. So they have these things that they want to do with data, but there are some steps that they have to do before they get to those more advanced things. And that's why we think they're going to be doubling down on their data practices. When we take a look at their existing data practices and the things that they're already doing, we asked all the companies in our survey what they thought their capabilities were around these data practices. And I think there's a couple things that are starting to emerge when we're asking companies about capability. A lot of it tends to center on recency bias. And if you're dealing with something that's maybe a mix of new things and more traditional things, you see that recency bias come up where the things that are more recent that companies are focusing on, those are the things that they say they've got a little bit more capability on. So when we look at our job families, we see companies saying they're a little bit more capable in areas like data and cybersecurity, and maybe a little less capable in an area like infrastructure. In that example, they're probably underestimating their capability on infrastructure. It's simply that they haven't looked at it very recently. They haven't tried to evaluate it. They assume that it's good enough. In a case like data practices, though, that's not quite what we're talking about. With data is sort of the most recent standalone discipline within IT operations. Infrastructure has been there for a long time. Software development has been there for quite a while. Cybersecurity has even been there for a couple decades now. But data has really emerged as a new standalone practice that companies are looking at. And with this, you're going to have recency bias where they say things like data security or data analytics are the places where they have more capability, and maybe they have less capability in some other things. In that case, they're probably accurate, but they probably should be placing more emphasis on things like their data infrastructure or their data governance or their data architecture or database administration. All of these things really need to come before the pieces that they get to. And something like data security probably bubbles to the top because that's been a focus area just within the cybersecurity practice. Data analytics obviously is something that companies have been focused on for some time in trying to get better about predicting the future or learning from the past. But what we've seen over years now is that you really can't do these things well, especially the analytics part, if you're not doing some data management well. So what are the challenges that companies are facing as they try to improve their data practices? Here again, we see a pattern where not everything is just about the technology. As companies have been investing in digital transformation and really pursuing strategic IT across their company, we're finding that there's not just technical components to it. There are also organizational pieces that come into play in terms of making decisions as an organization about what direction you want to go and how that influences the technology. And then there are also some skill pieces. And so with data, we have things like speeding up data analysis. Everyone wants that to be real time. What does that mean? Well, it sounds like it means increasing the amount of compute infrastructure you have, or maybe increasing the bandwidth of your network. This is where edge computing has really risen to be a complement to cloud usage and cloud systems. Or you could look at a topic like integrating data from silos, and you say, yep, we've got to set up our storage architecture correctly so that we can build a data lake or a data warehouse and get data out of silos into something more comprehensive so that the analytics tools can look at everything all together. And those are primarily technical components, but even those technical components have an organizational component. If you're trying to speed up the data, how much data is, or how much speed is enough? Real time might not be achievable, or it might be too costly in a lot of cases. And so that needs to be an organizational decision in the same way that risk management is an organizational decision for cybersecurity. When you're integrating data from silos, how do we classify that data? How do we prioritize the data? How do we keep some data that might contain our most important IP separate from some of the other data that we might be trying to collect? So those have organizational components. And then there are some challenges that are purely organizational, like building data policy. We've talked about with cybersecurity, the fact that privacy is the top challenge that is driving a lot of cybersecurity strategy. Well, that really starts with defining as an organization how you're going to handle data, especially when it's coming from the outside, if it's coming from customers or suppliers, and then you would implement a technical solution. Handling data regulations and having compliance to the regulatory landscape, that's highly organizational, policy-driven, process-driven. Finally, then you do get to the skill component. And when we get to the skill component and we're looking at the challenges, we definitely see this split with the way that companies are considering their data approach. Among the two areas that they want to focus on, building data analytics skill is quite a bit higher than building data management skill, even though that data management skill is the first thing that has to happen before you can do proper analysis. So companies really need to think through how they're approaching this as an organization. They need to understand the different skill levels that they want to build. And as we look at the things that they're planning to do in the coming year to improve their data practices, the top thing that they're expecting to do is invest in training for their data specialists. And that starts with recognizing that there are really two different types of data specialists. I mentioned the analytics path or the management path. Those tend to be separate functions. You don't necessarily have a database administrator that's doing a lot of analytics or a data scientist that's also handling the infrastructure of the data. So management and analytics tend to be separate paths, and companies need to consider where those people sit, how they're organized, how you build skills, and how you measure that skill building. Then they also want to invest in training for their entire workforce. And this is really a part of digital fluency. Digital fluency is something that a lot of companies are becoming more interested in building among their entire workforce. And it goes beyond the devices that they're using or the applications that they're using for workflow. Everybody that's using digital technology has to be aware of cybersecurity implications. They need to have some awareness of data flow, and they need to have some awareness of how AI works. So all of those things are really playing into digital fluency. And that's where we see companies wanting to build some of that awareness and that acumen around how data works. And then the third big thing that companies say they're wanting to do to improve their data practices is invest in their data architecture. But they tend to be thinking about the hardware and software that's needed. Again, they're tending to think about these technical components. And when it comes to data architecture, like I said before, it's sort of like risk management with cybersecurity. I think companies need to realize these decisions and discussions have to happen at the top so that the decisions then influence the technical architecture that's going to get built. So it's nice to see that a lot of companies are planning to take steps to improve their data practices and policies. Obviously, they want to ultimately get to those advanced steps, but they're going to have to take some measured action before they get there. We've been looking at data for several years now. If you want to look at any more of our data research or dig a little deeper on the Outlook study, please visit CompTIA's website at comptia.org, and I will see you on the next episode of TrendWatch.